I'm so excited about this. I got to hear Skye Perryman speak for the first time this fall in Dallas, and I have been a longtime fan. First time I got to meet her. Skye Perryman was named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world in 2025. She is the executive director of Democracy Forward. How many of y'all know Democracy Forward? Okay, well, I hope she's listening and hears that. Democracy Forward sues people. That's what they do. And so Skye is she is a great person to have that role because she's an attorney. She's also a great person to be leading our country trying to find its way forward in democracy because she is from Texas. Her dad, many of you know, is Ray Perryman, who knows a lot about Texas, and so does she. And you have her whole bio in your notebook, so I won't take up any more time. I just want to say I'm super excited to hear from her. Let me give you Skye Perryman.
Okay, I'm hoping you can hear me. It is wonderful to get to join you tonight, and I appreciate your flexibility in letting me attend virtually both the weather in Washington and, of course, the events over the weekend in Minnesota have made it to where I could not get to Texas. So, which is a real shame for me because I love any time I can be in Texas. But I appreciate you all having me here tonight virtually. And I also just wanted to thank you for your engagement and what you are doing in this time for our nation, for our communities. It is such a heavy time. I woke up this morning from a text from a friend who is a Baptist minister who himself was having a moment of despair. How do we talk to our kids about what's happening in this time? How do we support our communities? How do we keep going? I know you're facing so much of that too, and we all have those questions. And so it is just wonderful to be able to be in your presence. And thank you for continuing to be engaged, continuing to strive to have hope and to take action, even when it seems that we're in such a place of despair. I also just wanted to acknowledge, as a fellow woman of faith, how wonderful it is to get to be in the company of all of you, of people who I know view your faith as central to the work that you're doing in the world, central to the mission that you have as people in the world. We all want to work and bring about a world, I know, that is fiercely loving, radically equal and free, and that values all people, regardless of age, race, gender, sex, sexual orientation, income level, nationality, immigration status, faith tradition, the language we speak, that a world that affirms all of us and loves all of us. On earth as it is in heaven, we know that is our work. And so thank you so much for having me here. It's such an intersection of community. And I was really motivated by the title that you have, hope, action, and accountability. That is what we need in this time. And while the work of bringing about this world of radical love, of hope, has always been hard, it seems that it's especially hard and heavy right now, and that it's even heavier, frankly, tonight than it was a few days ago, as we've seen another individual, a U.S. citizen, a public servant, a nurse, someone who was helping, an unknown woman, as we are taught to do by our faith and by our values, was murdered by federal agents. And of course, that's not an isolated incident. Renee Good was also murdered recently, and we have community members and people being disappeared from our communities, in some instances without process. And at the same time, with this weather, we know that there are people who are unable to afford heat or homes, We have a climate crisis, and then the list goes on and on and on. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and the heaviness I know we're all feeling, but also the motivation that this time brings us. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how we got here and what it means. And then what we've learned in this last year at Democracy Forward, my organization, which is a nonpartisan organization that does a lot of work to make sure that people in communities can use their rights and to access the courts and also use their voices in this time. So I'll talk about a bit what we've learned, what I know you all and others have learned through your work. And then the future, where we're going and what we all can do in this moment. And then I'm just really honored to be able to have some time with you all to be able to answer your questions or to engage in some Q&A. So let me start with how we got here. We know that in the United States, of course, while we have called ourselves a democracy, we've never truly achieved actual democracy. 250 years ago this July, we're now celebrating the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness has a great ring to it, and yet it was unavailable. It was unavailable to all of us who are gathered here tonight as women. It was unavailable to enslaved persons, to indigenous persons, to people of color, to white men who did not own property, and the list goes on. So there has always been a promise and a pain that's been part of the American democracy experience and experiment. But over the course of our history, the work of American democracy has been to overcome those things, to make democracy accessible to all people, with a lot of work and dedication and bloodshed and tears and suffering and sorrow, but also hope and movement and activism. We have moved from a nation where democracy was restricted to a small number of people to one that has been expanding the rights of people. And so that has always been the work of American democracy. And it was hard work, even before this 2025 inauguration, even before changes in Texas and in other states and the rise of Christian nationalism in the United States. This was hard work, the work to move forward. But over the past few years, the United States has actually entered a new paradigm where the work is not just how we move forward and how we make democracy more accessible to people, how we truly achieve that vibrant and bold democracy for all. But the question has been, can we even hold on to some of the hard-earned and hard-fought gains that we've made as a community of people and as a country? And that has really been up for grabs these past few years. And no, it didn't just start last year with the inauguration of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. You are in Texas, so I don't have to go through the history that I often have to go through when I'm speaking to other communities. In Texas, you've been living a Democratic backslide for some time. Democracy has been imperiled, whether it is through voter suppression laws, off-cycle redistricting, which of course happened in Texas decades before we're seeing this push now, or the restriction of the basic rights and opportunities of people. But for the nation, in 2021, the United States was added to a list of global backsliding democracies. So I'm going to pause and I'm going to say that again. In 2021, the United States was added to a list of global backsliding democracies. This was after January 6th, where the entire nation saw, and people, of course, in that work on Capitol Hill experienced, the first time in U.S. history where there was a threat to the peaceful transition of presidential power with the January 6, 2021 insurrection. And of course, we just marked that 5th year since January 6th. But it wasn't January 6th that actually led international researchers at the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. It wasn't actually just January 6th, 2021 that led those researchers to put the United States on a list of global backsliding democracies. It was that moment that caused them to realize maybe they were a bit biased about the way they look at American democracy. But when they went back and looked, they had found that the United States had been on a backslide at least since 2019 and maybe even earlier. The United States is an outlier in this, in that it was at the time the only Western advanced economy in the world that was added to that global backsliding list. And here's the other important thing. The United States remained on that list every year since. There were many reasons that we were known as seen as a backslider. One was the lack of effective checks and balances. The fact that our legislative branches, including in the U.S. Congress, have for many years been dysfunctional. The Supreme Court has been shaped by a far-right movement, including a movement that has been influenced by Christian nationalism, where the court has reversed the rights of people in recent years as opposed to consistently protecting them. And then you, of course, have the rise of misinformation, disinformation, and election denialism. And again, that did not start in 2020. It certainly didn't start in 2025. We saw in 2017 President Trump at the time seeking to deny popular election results, to question those results because he did not win the popular vote and was upset about it. And then we've seen a far-right media ecosystem as well as, big tech platforms create conditions where misinformation and disinformation is rampant. So it was all of those things, as well as the fact that the states, many states, including, of course, my beloved home state of Texas, where you all are, had become more extreme with how their legislatures and governors were governing. It was all of those factors that led the United States to be placed on that list. And again, that's in 2021. And so the question last presidential election cycle was not whether the United States was going to be able to exponentially propel itself to some bold and vibrant democracy for all. The question was whether our country was going to be able to have leaders that would work to slow that backslide, to slow it, and that possibly with the work and activism of the American people be able to U-turn and to turn it around. Or whether we were going to be governed by an administration that put us on a more rapidly accelerating backslide to autocracy. That was really the question. And what happened in 2024 is, of course, President Trump was elected. He was elected by distancing himself on the campaign trail from some of the most extreme policies that the administration is not pursuing. What data showed us at the time and continues to show us is that the vast majority of people in America, whether they are conservative or liberal or moderate or apolitical or progressive, I mean, you name it, the vast majority of people in our country reject the types of extremism that we saw in Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025. The vast majority of people in this country want public education, and they don't want the Department of Education to be decimated. They want people to have rights to make choices about their health care. They want life to be more affordable and understand the importance of fair wages and climate protections. That's what the data showed even in 2024. And yet the president on the campaign trail did not level with the American people, disclaimed Project 2025, acted like he didn't know, right? Acted like he didn't know what it was. And what happened, of course, was right after he was elected, we started seeing what many of us had feared for some time, was that the administration was going to be filled with architects of that project in core positions, and that President Trump and J.D. Vance would engage in a way of governing the country that was on a collision course with the United States Constitution. And that is, of course, what has happened over the past year, where we have seen far beyond just a continuation of structural inequities and issues that need to be addressed by any policymaker. We have seen this administration at the federal level govern in a way that is on a collision course to the Constitution, with the Constitution. And of course, what we know now is that the United States is in a rapidly accelerating autocratic backslide. You compound that with the extremism that we see in certain states and communities, community governments across the country, and you have a real perfect storm recipe for a vastly accelerating autocracy. And so that while that sounds and is so incredibly horrifying. And people are getting hurt. They are being killed. People are struggling in ways that they haven't struggled in a long, long time, or even in some instances before. There's also a piece of being in a new paradigm, a democracy that is truly not only just in backslide, but has approached the levels of autocracy. There's a part of being in that new paradigm that becomes very, very clarifying for people like you, for people like me, for people like your neighbors who want to live in a free country, in a country that serves all. And when you're in this new paradigm, the course and the path forward becomes increasingly clear. You're either going to do everything you can with the position and the power that you have as an individual to fight for your future, to fight for your kids, to fight for your communities, to fight for our democracy. Or you're really aiding and abetting a backslide into autocracy. And so over the past year, we have seen so many tragedies in our democracy, but we have also seen historic responses from the people. Let me tell you a little bit about those responses. Last year, we saw 2 of the largest single days of peaceful mobilizations in United States history with no King's protest. These were not just protests by people who were used to making signs and engaging in activism. They reached deep into communities. In places like my deep red hometown of Waco, Texas, there are people that are persistently demonstrating every week because of the disappearances of community members and because of the collision course that this administration is taking with our Constitution. Data last year suggested that people in deep red areas are protesting and demonstrating and using their voices more frequently than in any time in modern history, including during the last Trump administration. We've seen that over the last year. We have seen that as powerful institutions, whether they are universities or elite law firms or corporations, have pulled back, have sat on the sidelines, or have worse, capitulated to what this administration wants them to do, have capitulated to that agenda. As those powerful institutions have stepped back, we have seen the people step forward. In the last year, there have been more than 600 federal court cases filed against the administration and its policies by people and communities, not by large elite corporate law firms, by people and communities. And nearly 70 to 80% of the time, those people and communities are winning in court. And even with the Supreme Court as it is, less than 5% of the cases have gone to the U.S. Supreme Court. You have been witnessing the largest and most successful affirmative legal effort against an executive branch in U.S. history, and it is being powered by people and communities, some of the organizations that you are engaged with, that our team at Democracy Forward is so honored to work with. It is being powered by people as powerful institutions have pulled back. And we recently saw in Minnesota, and we're seeing in Minnesota, despite frigid, unreal climates, -40 degrees climates, despite not only threats from the White House and from federal agents, but active attempts by federal agents to engage in violence against the people, to harm or even kill those that are protesting. We have seen people show up in thousands on the streets, undeterred by these threats, showing that they are committed to doing everything it takes in this new paradigm to be on the right side of history and on the right side of humanity. It is being powered in local communities like the ones that you all live and work in. This is not a movement that's coming from the top down. It is a movement that is coming from the bottom up. And it is deeply, deeply related to the global work that we have to restore democracy in the United States and to be freedom and democracy loving people abroad. It is a hyper local time, where local communities are making such a difference with massively global consequences. So what have we learned over the last year? At Democracy Forward, we have been honored to represent people and communities in hundreds of cases, in hundreds of investigations, in thousands of demands. We work at the federal level. We also work at the state and local level. We occasionally have to sue the governor or the legislature in Texas. So we're at sort of all levels, and we work with hundreds of other organizations, including ones that you all support, to do this work together. And so we have a decent view of what has happened over the last year. So here are some things that we learned. We've always known, but the last year has affirmed that democracy is a kitchen table issue. Threats to the separation of powers, when the president says he doesn't want to abide by, the structures that Congress set out, that he wants to decimate agencies from the Department of Education to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to USAID to HUD. Those are kitchen table issues. We have seen and fought for and won access to SNAP benefits on behalf of 42 million people that were being taken away because of the administration's autocratic approach. That affordability, the ability of people to be able to access what they need in their homes and in their communities, it is deeply tied to the strength of our democracy, to the willingness of people to step up and fight back and push back in the courts and in their communities. We have seen, and people are realizing, that issues of democracy concern our ability to get good jobs, to be able to live in conditions that are affordable. At Democracy Forward, we have seen over the past year people of all ideological backgrounds joining together to fight overreach. Let me give you some examples that might hit home for you. When the president revoked a memo and this was Kristi Noem, it was the first thing she did after she was confirmed by the U.S. Senate, revoked a memo that had been in place for 30 years, a policy that had been in place for 30 years, including, by the way, in the last Trump administration, in Republican and Democratic administrations, that said that ICE could not conduct indiscriminate enforcement operations in schools and in hospitals and in houses of worship. We saw faith communities across the country come together to sue in court to challenge that revocation of protection for houses of worship. At Democracy Forward, we are pleased to have won a court order that is still in place. It is protecting the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, which is hundreds of thousands of Baptist, of Quaker meeting houses, and of the largest Sikh temple in California. And we are working to expand that relief in other cases to more and more faith communities. But we have seen communities that may not be like each other, that may not believe like each other, that may not even at times be on the same side of political issues, come together in order to take action, because this is such a kitchen table issue that is affecting people and communities across the country. In the early days of the administration, you might remember the president sought to cut off all federal funding to people across the country, literally everything from Meals on Wheels to small business credits to Head Start to SNAP. All of those federal programs, as well as community programs, were going to be threatened by a nationwide funding freeze. At Democracy Forward, we were proud to represent groups like the National Council of Nonprofits, the American Public Health Association, SAGE, and Main Street Alliance, which is a group of small businesses. Again, all groups that are very different from each other, that come at things from different perspectives, but that all came together very quickly to get into court to stop that funding freeze from going into effect. And in the education space, which I know is near and dear to many of your hearts, we have seen small school districts work with educators and workers and cities to bring challenges to the president's anti-education agenda, to bring challenges in some states across the country, and to prevail in some instances. And I'm not going to sugarcoat how horrible the administration's policies are and how harmful they are. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. But I will say that we have seen that when people come together and push back, there can be real important results for people. I'll give you two examples in the education context, and then I'll take some in Q&A. We can talk more about education, including the vouchers, which I know is a concern in Texas. But in the education context, after the president decimated the Department of Education, we were able to go to court to secure a court order that prevented him from doing that. However, the Supreme Court, on its shadow docket, without any explanation at all, paused our court order, which meant that the president was going to continue his destruction agenda. As part of that agenda, the president was impounding between $6 to $7 billion of public education funds that would have prevented schools from being able to operate with their budgets this school year. So instead of being deterred by what happened at the Supreme Court, our team went back and with a group of brave clients filed another case to stop the withholding of that funding. At the same time that we filed that case, people in communities across the country, including, by the way, in red communities all over states like Texas and other states across the country, made their calls to their representatives and to the White House. And the combination of that pressure forced the administration's hand and restored public education funding, $6 to $7 billion of it for schools this year, so that our kids can be in publicly funded schools without the president impounding those funds. So that is a huge victory. We wish that things were better, but it is an example of, had people not been willing to push back, had people been either despondent or deterred by what the Supreme Court did, or thinking that they live in a red state or they live in a red community, there's no point in making these calls. Had people not stepped forward, public education right now would look even worse than it does. Here's another example. You'll recall that the president's Valentine to the American people was for his Department of Education to produce a letter, what's known as the Dear Colleague letter, that threatened funding of educational institutions, K through 12 institutions and higher education institutions, including private institutions that take federal dollars either through the students that attend their universities having financial aid or through other research grants. It threatened all federal funding if institutions of higher learning did not teach and align with the views of the White House on civil rights laws. So it threatened the ability to teach history, to engage in equity programs. Not a single university sued to stop that, even the most powerful ones. We could not get them to step up and go to court, but the people did. Educators, the teachers' unions, the educators, academics, and even a small public school district went to court, won a court order to stop those funding cuts across the country, a court order that remained in place. The administration recently was planning to appeal that. And just a few days ago, we got word, and it was announced and in the news everywhere, that they have abandoned their appeal. So that is a huge example of how, when people push back, when powerful institutions are shy, the people are stepping forward, and it matters. And it matters to the kitchen table issues. Don't let anyone ever tell you democracy is not a kitchen table issue. What we've learned over the past year, the second thing we've learned, is that it is people, not institutions, that must take us out of where we are. Institutions can be helpful, but it is going to be the people. That's what this time tells us. That's what history has told us. The ability of people, of course, requires people to use every lever of power available to them. And our work at Democracy Forward and getting into court and bringing cases is more about the people being able to exercise their power and use their voice in those ways. We've seen in recent elections people holding their elected officials accountable for harming their communities. And of course, we've seen, like I mentioned, massive mobilizations, peaceful mobilizations of people. And we're going to have to keep doing that. In this new paradigm of a rapidly accelerating backslide of our democracy, it is people that will take us through. And the other thing that we have learned is that courage is the new currency. I'm going to say that again. Courage is the new currency. Courage is the thing. Courage is the resource that will take us through this time. We all know that courage comes from a Latin root of a word that means heart. And in the context of being people and women of faith, courage is about knowing the truth and being willing to tell it. Knowing what's right and being willing to do it. Courage requires fear. So it is okay to be afraid, but courage is the decision that all of us make in the face of fear. We know that as people, We know that as Americans. And in this context, we know that as people of faith. It is always fear not that the angels tell us when they arrive to us. So courage is the new currency. And I can tell you that I've told, many that are leading powerful institutions need to understand this. Because capitulating or giving in is not going to buy or build anyone power or leverage over an administration and a movement that seems so intent on stomping on the rights of people without consequence. But when people step forward and step up, we have seen that courage can take us through. You are seeing that in Minnesota right now. We've seen that with the cases that I've given you some examples of, where people step forward and we're able to secure incredibly important wins that are keeping communities safe, that are keeping people educated. And we also see that in our everyday work. So courage is the new currency. But it is community that helps create the conditions for courage. The number one tool that autocratic actors have, whether you consider movements in this country like slavery and Jim Crow, whether you look abroad to the fascist movements in the 1930s and 40s, whether you look abroad today to places like Viktor Orban's Hungary or Vladimir Putin's Russia. The number one tool that autocratic actors have is making you feel alone, making you feel hopeless, and making you feel scared. And so what we have to do in this moment is defy that isolation, defy that fear. When we feel it bubbling up, we have to build community and be in community together so that we can build forward. So I'm now going to talk a bit about what we can all do, but the number one thing we can do in this moment, and this is not trite and it's not a talking point, it is the number one thing that history shows us, that our present shows us, that the last year has shown us, is to defy isolation, to build community, to refuse to be told and refuse to believe the noise that's out there that is suggesting that you are powerless. So that is number one. Build community, lean into courage. Courage is contagious, and being in community with others like you were doing tonight, but like you were doing and facilitating in your local communities, is incredibly important. And when we find that despair bubbling up, do what my friend did earlier today. Text a friend. Call someone, reach out. Go to websites like democracy4.org or your Women in Faith groups or so many other groups where you can connect with people, where you can receive information and not feel alone. Do what you are doing tonight. That is what is going to be required in this time. Other things that we can do in this moment is to remember who we are and remember what project we are on. Democracy has always been an underdog. I think some people think that human history somehow was all leading up to democracy as a form of government and democracy being able to be accessible to all people. This has always been a very underdog position. For the vast majority of human history, societies have been ordered, with some people being dehumanized, with other people being put on a platform. This experiment that we are having in the United States of American democracy is a unique one. And it's one that has always been an underdog and requires all of us every day to commit to sustain it. So let's not discontinue our experiment, but let's also remember who we are. This is not a country that has not faced autocracy in its own borders before. Remember the people that fought for civil rights. Remember the people that fought to abolish slavery. Remember the people that fought for workers' equities. We stand on their shoulders in this moment, and we need to channel their spirit, and we need to take pride in the fact that what we are trying to do in this moment is very hard, because we're trying to do something meaningful, which is to secure democracy and secure our ability to continue building a more inclusive democracy for the future. By definition, that is a hard thing. It was a hard thing 250 years ago. It is a hard thing today. And we need to take pride in doing that hard thing. And don't let the lives of people who have fought and died for our freedom, for greater justice, for greater equality. Don't let the lives of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, do not let those lives be in vain. We have to choose courage, and we have to remember who we are. And part of choosing courage is building community. So one tangible thing that everyone can do from tonight is to affirm that you are going to continue to be in community. You're going to continue to be active with each other, but you're going to find more ways to encourage community. At Democracy Forward, we have some resources at democracyforward.org called Dinners for Democracy and Coffee for Change, and other ways of helping people facilitate the building of community and the strengthening of our bonds. The next thing that we can all do is to take small actions, small, repeatable actions every day that we know can make a big change. That is going to look different for each of you, depending on what circumstances you're in, depending on the needs of your community, and depending your resources. It can be something as simple as showing up to school board meetings, even if you don't have kids, to watch and listen what is happening, to figure out what's going on at your local library. Make sure you have a library card, and make sure you're watching if there's censorship or other threats to the First Amendment and to the ability of people in this country to engage with ideas and to freely read. Even before inauguration, we were seeing historic rates of book bans across this country, thousands of them, according to PEN America's analysis. Far before inauguration, far before this current crisis. And what we know is that when the freedom to read and the freedom to engage with ideas is under attack, so too is our democracy. So whatever those local actions are, and we have some resources, I know you have resources in the workshops and work groups you're going to, find 5 of them that you can take repeatedly. Those actions, those hyper-local actions, make a big difference. They make a global difference. We need to, as Christians, because this is this community that we're in tonight, one of those small actions that we all need to commit to taking is to really being serious about our obligations as people of faith and as Christians to confront Christian nationalism, to speak out and to speak up, whether in private conversations, small groups, or in the public square, when our religion is being utilized to terrorize people, to shame others, to undermine the radical notion that is expressed in our sacred text, that people are equal and that all people are deserving of dignity. That is one of the small actions that we all have to take as a responsibility for being in this community, is to confront Christian nationalism. And of course, for those of you that are living in Texas, which I think is the majority of you, you have opportunities to do that every single day. The next thing we can do is to make a plan. You need to plan for how you're getting your media. Who are you listening to? Is the media sources that you're listening to accurate? Are you doom scrolling every day where you end up at the end of the doom scroll feeling despondent and hopeless and alone? Remember, that's giving in to the number one tool that autocratic actors have, so we can't give into it. So we need to make a plan for how we're going to engage with media. How are we going to read and learn and not shut our eyes to what's happening, but also be responsible and utilize media and accurate and truthful resources that can help us take action and that can help us move from where we are to another place, as opposed to that brings us down into a despondent state where no one takes action. We need to make a plan about how and we are going to confront extremism and what we are going to do when the extremism that you are seeing in Minnesota comes to your front door, because it will, if we don't act in this moment and act together. So we at Democracy Forward have Know Your Rights resources on our website. The ACLU has a number of Know Your Rights resources, but you need to know your rights and you need to make a plan. And you don't just need to wish that this isn't going to happen. How are you going to protect your neighbor? How are you going to talk to your kids? How are you going to interface together? How can you help a neighbor? How can you be in community? You don't have to make a plan alone. You can pull together your family members. You can pull together your community members, members of this organization, or even your neighbors. But it is important to make a plan as opposed to just hoping and wishing that this threat is not going to come to your door. It is at your door, and it's going to be at your door. And of course, as we look to the elections, we're going to have to make a plan. for how we are going to vote and how we are going to insist that our vote be counted. And I'm happy to talk more about the elections in the Q&A section. Finally, we need to remember that we did not get into this situation and this crisis as a country overnight, and we are not going to get out of it overnight. There's not a piece of legislation, there's not a single court case, there's not one election cycle that is going to take us out of this crisis. This is generational work that we are going to have to do and be persistent about doing. We are going to have to defeat the attention economy and this notion that you can just solve things from election cycle to election cycle, and make a commitment to be in this work persistently throughout our lives. We say the only way out is through, but we can go through it together. So I'm going to conclude these remarks and then go into what I'm really looking forward to, our question and answer period. But I will conclude these remarks, since we are in a faith-based community here, with some words that I read several times a day and that have motivated my work, that I believe that you all epitomize in the work that you are doing. And I believe these are words that we will need as we move forward together. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Reverend William Sloane Coffin, he was a prominent social justice advocate and civil rights advocate. He was a university chaplain, and he was the pastor of the Riverside Church. Reverend Coffin would be one of the leaders of the Freedom Riders. He would ride through the South and was arrested multiple times during the civil rights movement. He would challenge segregation laws, and he was, of course, with Dr. King on the March on Washington. He also opposed the war in Vietnam. We are in a different time now, but we are in a time that rhymes. They say that, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And we are in a time that rhymes. And so I wanted to share the benediction that Reverend William Sloane Coffin would give and end many of his sermons with when he was the pastor of the Riverside Church of New York during these trying times in our past. And it's very special to me because I first heard, and I thought it would be very special to you, given the community that we're in tonight. I first heard this benediction at the end of a sermon that the Reverend Amy Butler gave at a Baptist church that I attended in Washington, D.C., as she was announcing to the congregation that she was leaving to become the first female minister of the Riverside Church in New York. The benediction meant so much to me. I wrote it down, and I have, like I said, read it multiple times a day since. And it could not be more poignant for the times that we're in now. So here it is. May God bless you and keep you. May God's face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May God give you the grace never to sell yourself short. The grace to risk something big for the sake of something good. The grace to remember that the world is now too dangerous for anything but truth and too small for anything but love. So may God take your mind and think through it. May God take your lips and speak through them. May God take your hands and work through them. And may God take your heart and set it on fire. Thank you so much for having me tonight. I am so looking forward to your questions. And thank you for, in this time, making a commitment to each other, to your communities, to your values, and to our nation to stay engaged, to do the work, and to find hope and accountability.